dreamed of marriage as the beginning of happiness. When she finally moved into her husband Obinna's family home in the busy town of Owerri, her heart was full of hope. She wanted nothing more than to be accepted, to be loved, and to make her new family proud. Every morning she woke up with determination, remembering the recipes her late grandmother had taught her: rich soups, spicy stews, and the kind of meals that carried love in every bite. She believed food could open hearts. But the moment she stepped into the house, she felt a cold wall around her. Madame Nkem, her mother-in-law, watched her with sharp eyes, as if Amarachi had stolen something precious. No matter how much Amarachi tried to smile or show respect, Madame Nkem's silence carried disapproval. Sometimes she would make little comments: "Our son deserves the best," or "Some women don't know their place," words that cut Amarachi quietly. Still, Amarachi refused to give up. She tied her wrapper, entered the kitchen, and cooked with passion, hoping the aroma of her grandmother's recipes would soften hearts. As the smell of fresh pepper soup filled the house, she imagined Madame Nkem smiling, maybe even saying, "Well done, my daughter." But that moment never came. Instead, there was always a tension in the air, whispers behind closed doors, and a feeling that no matter what she did, it would never be enough. Yet inside her, Amarachi carried a stubborn flame. She told herself, "I will win them with love. I will win them with food." But she had no idea how difficult the road ahead would be. One quiet afternoon, Amarachi was walking past the veranda when she heard the voices of her husband's relatives. They didn't know she was nearby, and their laughter carried through the walls. "Her cooking tastes like the village," one woman said, chuckling. "Obinna should be eating like a king, not like a farmer." Another added, "She burns pots. Imagine, our big Obinna marrying a girl who doesn't even know modern food. What shame." Their words stabbed her heart. Amarachi froze, her tray shaking in her hands. She wanted to step forward to defend herself, but instead she stood quietly, listening as her own dignity was torn apart like old cloth. Then came Madame Nkem's voice, strong and sharp. "Did I not say it? Our son deserved a wife with class. Look at what we got, someone who cooks like it's still the 1960s. I only hope she does not embarrass us further." The women burst into more laughter, and Amarachi felt her knees weaken. She walked back to her room slowly, holding her breath so no one would hear her cry. Inside, she sat on the edge of the bed and buried her face in her hands. All the love she had poured into her cooking, all the memories of her grandmother teaching her how to stir a pot with patience, it all felt like nothing now. Her dream of being welcomed into this home seemed to fade with every cruel word. But Amarachi was not one to give up easily. She wiped her tears and told herself she had to stay strong. Soon Madame Nkem announced a big dinner to show society her son's home. Amarachi knew the spotlight would fall on her cooking. Fear filled her heart. What if she failed again? What if the whispers turned into open laughter? Yet somewhere deep inside she also carried hope. She thought of her grandmother's voice, gentle and firm. "Cook with love, my Ada. Even those who mock you cannot deny true flavor." With that memory, Amarachi took a deep breath. She would enter the kitchen again, no matter the pain in her heart. If this dinner was her test, she would face it with courage, even if it broke her. The evening of the grand dinner finally arrived, and the compound was glowing with lights. Colorful fabrics hung across the walls, the tables were covered in white cloth, and chairs were neatly arranged for the many important guests. Cars kept driving in, one after the other, politicians in fine suits, business leaders with their wives dressed in glittering lace, and extended family members eager to see the big show Madame Nkem had promised. The air was thick with perfumes, laughter, and the sound of greetings. While the compound sparkled outside, Amarachi was hidden away in the heat of the kitchen. From sunrise she had been on her feet, washing, chopping, stirring, and tasting. Sweat rolled down her face, but she didn't care. Every dish she prepared carried a piece of her heart: steaming jollof rice, pepper soup that smelled of home, egusi stew rich with flavor, and soft pastries baked golden brown. She remembered her grandmother's words: "When you cook, cook with your spirit, not just your hands." That was exactly what she was doing, pouring her spirit into every plate. She hoped tonight would change everything. Maybe, just maybe, Madame Nkem would finally smile at her, or the guests would praise her food and silence the whispers. She wanted so badly to belong, to be seen not as a mistake but as a worthy wife for Obinna. But as she carried dishes to the servers, her eyes met Madame Nkem's. The older woman sat on the far end of the room with folded arms, her face hard as stone. Not a word of encouragement, not even a nod, only cold eyes watching, waiting, almost daring Amarachi to fail. The sight made Amarachi's heart beat faster, but she forced herself to keep moving. Inside she prayed silently, God, let them taste the love in this food. Let tonight be different. Yet a small fear still lingered in her chest. Because she knew Madame Nkem was not just a mother-in-law, she was a storm waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Amarachi could only hope her food would be strong enough to shield her from the humiliation that seemed to hang in the air, ready to fall. Plates of food were finally laid on the long decorated tables. The aroma of egusi, jollof rice, pepper soup, and pastries filled the air, and for a brief moment Amarachi allowed herself to hope. She watched as the guests began to eat, their spoons clinking gently against the plates. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for. But then, without warning, Madame Nkem's voice cut through the air like a knife. "What kind of tasteless food is this?" she shouted, her words dripping with scorn. "Even the market women in the village cook better than you." The room went silent, and then came the gasps. Heads turned sharply, eyes wide with shock. Amarachi's body stiffened as though her feet were nailed to the floor. The tray in her hand trembled, and she felt her pulse racing. A few of the guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to eat or to put their spoons down. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others, emboldened by Madame Nkem's harshness, let out quiet laughter and whispers. "Ah, so it is true," someone muttered. Amarachi's throat tightened. The dishes she had poured her soul into, the flavor she had carried from her grandmother's kitchen, the food she had prayed over, were now being mocked in front of the very people she had hoped to impress. She wanted to disappear, to run out of the room and never return. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she forced herself to stand tall, even though her whole body was shaking. She tried to meet her husband Obinna's eyes, hoping for comfort, but he sat in silence, trapped between loyalty to his mother and his wife. That silence cut Amarachi even deeper than Madame Nkem's words. In that moment, Amarachi felt her dream of belonging crumble. Everything she had done to prove herself, every meal, every smile, every prayer, seemed wasted. She was no longer just a bride in her new home. She was a spectacle, the subject of laughter and whispers. And as the sound of quiet chuckles spread across the table, Amarachi's spirit broke. She realized that no matter how hard she tried, the acceptance she longed for might never come. The room had grown so heavy with silence that Amarachi could hear her own heartbeat. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, her hands trembling by her side, as Madame Nkem's cruel words still echoed in her ears. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to continue eating or to put down their spoons. Some whispered, some forced uneasy smiles, and others simply stared at Amarachi with pity. It felt as though the whole world was closing in on her. Then, slowly, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the silence. Chief Adewale, an elder guest and one of the most respected businessmen in the community, stood up. He was a man known for wisdom, a man whose words carried weight everywhere he went. All eyes immediately turned to him. He laid his spoon carefully on the table, cleared his throat, and looked straight at Madame Nkem. "Madame Nkem," he began, his voice calm but firm, "with all due respect, this food is not tasteless. On the contrary, it is delicious. More than that, it carries the flavor of heritage." The room froze. Amarachi's head lifted slightly, her tear-filled eyes searching his face in disbelief. "This young woman," Chief Adewale continued, gesturing toward Amarachi, "has cooked with dignity. These dishes are not just food. They are culture, they are memory, they are love on a plate. Anyone who cannot see that is blind to the beauty of tradition." A low murmur spread across the room as guests nodded in agreement. Some whispered, "He is right," while others began to eat again with more appreciation, praising the taste aloud. A few even clapped their hands lightly on the table in support. Madame Nkem's proud smile faltered, her face tightening as the strength of the elders' words sank in. For the first time that evening, she looked unsettled. The laughter and whispers that had filled the room only moments ago began to fade, replaced by respectful silence and quiet admiration for Amarachi's cooking. Amarachi stood frozen, her chest rising and falling as if she had been pulled back from drowning. A spark of hope lit up inside her. Someone had finally seen her, defended her, and spoken the truth she had longed for. In that moment everything changed. The insult that was meant to destroy her had been turned into her first victory. After Chief Adewale's words, the atmosphere in the compound began to shift. Guests who had been silent suddenly found their voices again. One woman lifted her spoon and said loudly, "This pepper soup tastes even better than what I had last week at a 5-star restaurant." Another man nodded and added, "The jollof rice is perfect, rich, flavorful, not too oily. This is real food." Soon voices rose one after the other, each guest eager to share their own praise. "Who prepared the pastries? They melt in the mouth. This egusi reminds me of my mother's cooking. It feels like home. Young lady, you must give me the recipe for this stew." Amarachi stood at the corner of the room, her hands still trembling, but her heart slowly beginning to steady. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The same dishes she thought would bring her humiliation were now being celebrated as treasures. For the first time that evening, her lips curved into a small, shaky smile. Meanwhile, Madame Nkem sat stiffly in her chair, her eyes darting from one guest to another as the praise poured in. She tried to laugh, forcing a smile as if the whole situation was a harmless joke. "Ah, you people like food too much," she said with a wave of her hand, but her voice lacked its usual power. Deep down, she knew her plan had failed. Instead of shaming Amarachi, she had accidentally made her shine. The guests continued to eat with joy, asking for second helpings and talking about how Amarachi's cooking carried both tradition and elegance. A few even asked if she had ever considered cooking professionally. Their admiration filled the room like warm light, washing away the earlier tension. Amarachi's chest rose and fell as she breathed in deeply. She was still shaken by the insult, but now instead of shame there was something new, something bright growing inside her. Pride. Not the loud kind, but the quiet spark that told her she had worth, that she carried something special within her. In that moment, Amarachi realized that sometimes even the harshest humiliation can become the doorway to unexpected respect. And though Madame Nkem's smile had faded, Amarachi's spirit had just begun to rise. When the last guest had left and the compound finally grew quiet, Amarachi slipped back into the kitchen. Her body was tired, her feet ached from standing all day, but her mind was still racing with everything that had happened. She sat on a small wooden stool, staring at her hands, the same hands that had almost been mocked into shame, the same hands now praised for their skill. As she sat there lost in thought, the door creaked open. Chief Adewale stepped inside, his tall figure filling the room. Amarachi quickly stood up, bowing her head respectfully. "Chief, good evening, sir," she said softly. He gave her a kind smile. "My daughter, sit. I only came to speak with you." Amarachi sat down again, nervous, her heart thumping. Chief Adewale looked at the trays of leftover food and nodded. "Do you know what you have, Amarachi?" he asked gently. She shook her head, unsure what he meant. "You have a rare gift," he said firmly. "The food you prepared tonight was not just tasty, it carried soul. I have eaten in restaurants across this country and even abroad, but very few meals touched me the way yours did tonight. That is not ordinary. That is talent." Amarachi's eyes widened, tears threatening to spill. No one had ever spoken to her like that. For so long she had only heard mockery, but now these words wrapped around her like warmth on a cold night. Chief Adewale continued, "I want you to think beyond this house. You can build something for yourself. Catering events, people will pay for food that makes them feel this way. I know men and women who organize high-profile gatherings, and I can connect you to them, but you must believe in yourself first." Amarachi hesitated, fear and doubt tugged at her heart. She was just a young bride, mocked as a village girl. Could she really do something so big? But looking into the chief's steady eyes, she felt a small seed being planted deep inside her chest, a seed of courage. She bowed her head, her voice trembling. "Thank you, sir. I don't know if I am ready, but I will try." And for the first time since entering her new home, Amarachi felt the future calling her name. Months passed, and the seed Chief Adewale planted in Amarachi's heart slowly began to grow. With quiet determination, she saved every small amount she could and finally opened a little catering service. She named it Flavors of Adeoma, in honor of her late grandmother, the woman who had first taught her that food was more than survival. It was love, culture, and memory. First, business was slow. Some people were curious, but many still doubted her. She delivered small trays of food to neighbors, took tiny birthday orders, and cooked for family gatherings. Some days she wondered if she had made a mistake, but each time she felt discouraged. She remembered the sparkle in Chief Adewale's eyes when he said, "You have a rare gift." That memory kept her going. Then came her chance. A family preparing for a large wedding gave her the opportunity to handle part of the catering. Amarachi poured everything into it, every spice, every flavor, every drop of her heart. The guests at the wedding couldn't stop talking about the meals. "Who cooked this jollof? It tastes like heaven. This egusi soup is unforgettable." Word spread quickly, and by the end of the week, Amarachi's phone rang non-stop. Soon, she was no longer just a young bride in her husband's family home. She was a name. People across Owerri and beyond wanted flavors of Adeoma at their events. Politicians, business leaders, and wealthy families sought her out, not only for her food but for the way she presented African tradition with elegance. Her dishes were not ordinary. They told stories of culture, roots, and pride. Amarachi's little catering service blossomed into a growing business. Her grandmother's recipes, once mocked as village style, now became her crown. Every pot she stirred, every plate she served, carried dignity. And as her fame rose, Amarachi realized something powerful. She was no longer waiting for acceptance in her husband's home. She had built her own table, and the world was gladly coming to sit at it. As Amarachi's name began to spread like wildfire across Owerri, life for Madame Nkem slowly started to change. The same woman who once sat proudly at gatherings, boasting of her family's influence, now found herself shrinking in silence. Wherever she went, whispers followed her like shadows. "Is that not the woman who tried to disgrace her own daughter-in-law?" Some neighbors would murmur as she passed. Others shook their heads, saying, "Imagine a mother-in-law mocking food that has now made the whole town proud." The same story spread again and again, how Madame Nkem insulted Amarachi in front of important guests, only to be corrected by Chief Adewale. At social gatherings, the shift was even more painful. Before, Madame Nkem was the center of attention, with people running to greet her. But now, conversations turned quickly to Amarachi. "Have you tasted flavors of Adeoma? Her pastries are unmatched. I heard she catered the governor's event. Her food carries tradition but looks so elegant, you must book her months in advance." Each compliment to Amarachi felt like a thorn in Madame Nkem's pride. Some hosts who once depended on Madame Nkem's name to connect them to society now skipped her entirely and went directly to Amarachi. She would sit in the corner, listening to people praise her daughter-in-law, and force a smile, though inside she burned with shame. For years, she had believed that power came from control and intimidation. But now she was learning that true respect could not be forced. It had to be earned. Home, the tension grew. Obinna, once quiet in his mother's shadow, began to openly admire Amarachi's strength. "Your food is everywhere now," he told her one night with pride. Madame Nkem overheard those words and felt a bitter sting in her chest. The very woman she had mocked was now the one lifting the family's name higher than she ever could. Slowly, Madame Nkem's pride began to crumble. Each day she was reminded of the night she had tried to break Amarachi, only to end up breaking her own image instead. The more Amarachi's reputation soared, the smaller Madame Nkem's voice became in society. And though she would never admit it aloud, deep inside she knew, the crown she once wore had slipped, and it now rested firmly on Amarachi's head. The night was bright with celebration as Amarachi welcomed guests into her brand-new catering hall, the pride of flavors of Adewale. The hall sparkled with golden lights, long tables lined with flowers, and the warm aroma of her finest dishes drifting through the air. It was more than just a dinner, it was a statement. She had built this with her own hands, her own courage. Chief Adewale, the man who had once spoken up for her when no one else dared, was the guest of honor. Politicians, business leaders, and influential families filled the hall, laughing and praising the food that Amarachi had created. Every plate that left the kitchen was met with admiration. Guests leaned across tables to say, "This is the best I've ever tasted," and, "She has turned tradition into royalty." At one corner of the hall, Madame Nkem sat quietly. The woman who had once mocked Amarachi's food now had no words left. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tightly together, as she watched the crowd she used to command now surround Amarachi with respect and love. No one asked for her opinion anymore. No one looked to her for approval. All eyes were on the young bride she had once tried to humiliate. Amarachi stood in the center of the room, her heart steady and full. She looked around at the tables filled with joy, then her gaze fell on her mother-in-law. Instead of anger, she felt peace. With a soft smile, she whispered to herself, "The same food they mocked became the feast of my crown." And in that moment, Amarachi knew she had truly arrived, not just as a cook, but as a woman who turned pain into power.